Hey guys, it's Josh with Budget Mechanic. Today we're going to be working on this 99 Toyota Corolla with the 1.8, and we're going to be replacing the front struts. And as you can see, I'm going to be replacing the whole assembly, whereas on some cars you can actually save $100 or more just replacing the strut cartridge and reusing the old spring. But on this car, it wasn't actually that much of a price difference to get the whole assembly, and so I'm just going to do it that way, save myself a little extra work. If you do just want to replace your strut cartridge and reuse your old springs, I'll post a link to a video on how you can actually do that. Before you get started on this job, I highly recommend you have one of these breaker bars. That's a 1/2-inch drive for your 19mm or 3/4 inch socket, because there's two bolts at the bottom of the strut that are really tight often, and you don't want to be doing it with 3/8 drive equipment. You can pick them up usually for like 15 bucks at your local parts store. Here's the lower part of your strut coming down, and it's attached to your hub assembly, your anvil here, with these two bolts. And then you have some peripheral brake line fittings that need to come off. Sometimes you can get away with just breaking these two bolts out, and you can kind of swing the anvil out of the way to get the strut down and out. But oftentimes I find I have to also remove the tie rod so that the whole thing can swing farther and allow this to pop down. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is take off this little brake line, which is a 14mm bolt. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts out, 19mm or 3/4 inch socket, and I'm going to go on the nut side versus the head bolt. And then the one on the bottom. There she comes. Tap these out. If these bolts are really tight and they're not coming out well, just make sure that you haven't lifted the car using the control arm. Sometimes that'll bind because you're fighting the strut itself. And if they're a little bit stuck, you can kind of use a screwdriver and a hammer, but you don't want to have to beat on that too hard. So now that I have this broken loose, you can kind of see what we have to work with. And this anvil we can kind of slide around a little bit. So now we're going to go break it loose up top, but before I do that, I'm just going to put a little pad underneath here so that it doesn't drop down and cut into my CV boot. So up top inside your engine compartment, you can see the top of the strut, nice and accessible on this model, and you have the 3 bolts that are holding it up. 12mm nut. I'm just going to loosen this first one before I take the others off so that the strut has something to hang on. It's not just going to fall down there. See, it kind of lowers itself down. It's hanging on that last one. So now I'm just going to take the weight of the strut down here, lift it up until I can just unscrew this last nut on the top. And now all I got to do is figure out how to get it out. I think what I'm going to do is drop it down inside this brake line until I can clear the top, and then I should be able to sneak it out. There you go. Okay, I'm just going to compare the new strut with the old strut and make sure that I have the right one. Struts are side specific, so you don't want to mix up your left and your right and find out after you've put it in. Oftentimes the new one that you put in will be labeled, like this one's got an L on it. And then the other side obviously will be R or right. But the main thing that you want to make sure is that all the hardware mounting spots are in the same place. And then attachment points and length, etc. So before I lift this thing in, I'm going to remove the nuts. I'm going to set them up here where I can easily reach them. Really helps if you have another person to help you, so you can get 2 hands on this because they can be a little heavy. But here we go. I'm just going to basically do the reverse of what I did before. So I'm going to sneak inside this brake line. into this hole. And you can kind of spin the head until they come through. There we go. So now I can get these nuts kind of started. If you're working on a car that has a too big or heavy of a strut, or you can't see the top, oftentimes I'll put a bunch of bungee cords down into these bolt holes and up to something up here to kind of at least take some of the weight so that it's a little bit more easily manageable. It's a good thing I have strong forearms, and you can too if you do this enough. Okay, the new strut came with 1.5 inch nuts, so I had to change my socket. But what I'm going to kind of do is lift it all the way up and then tighten these down. You want to make sure that this ring is fitting inside the body panel. So take a look at these big bolts that you pulled out of the bottom of your strut. If they look like this, totally uniform all the way around, that means they're factory bolts and you have nothing to worry about. If there's like a raised side or a big lump at this collar, it means they're aftermarket bolts, and you're going to have to get your car realigned after you do this job. So I now just need to lift this back into place. So I'm probably going to have to press down on this to get my bolt to line up. And give it a nice shake. You want to make these pretty snug. I think this tab got a little bent, either in shipping or elsewhere. So I'm going to bend it back a little bit so there's not as much stress on the brake line. Just going to bend it up there a little bit. A little better, and maybe I'll twist it this way a hair or two. There we go. Just a little tip, anytime you have the wheel off like this, it's a great time to check your brake pads, making sure you have lots of life left. Really easy to do right in here. And these ones look great, so let's put the wheel back on. Okay, strut is in. Now you can move to the other side. It's an identical job, and just make sure you have the correct strut for that side. And you want to do them in pairs. You don't want to just do one side or the other. Do them both at the same time. You won't need an alignment after this job unless the bolts that I showed you before have that lobe on them. Otherwise you should be good to go. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.